Good morning. Kim Hammer, pastor, Saline Missionary Baptist Church down in Tull for your morning devotion. Thank you for joining me this morning on a beautiful Monday morning. We're going to take a look at the book of Genesis chapter 19 and chapter 20. Now, Sodom and Gomorrah had just been destroyed. Lot and his two daughters escaped. His wife, remember, she turned around or went back, and as a result of it, she perished and became a pillar of salt. The two son-in-laws that were supposed to be married to the two girls, they laughed at Lot and didn't believe him, and so they also perished in the town. Abraham, he has gone back to be with Sarah when all this happened, and so now it's a day later, a couple days later, and Lot and his two daughters are hiding in the cave where they retreated to in order not to be destroyed. Today's devotion is going to be, just for better terms, a little bit weird. So what happens is Lot's daughters decide to get him drunk 2 nights in a row. And on the first night, the oldest daughter slept with him and she conceived. And the second night, the youngest daughter, she slept with him and she conceived. Out of this came the Moabite tribes and the Ammonite tribes. And then you move on down and you find that Abraham and Sarah, as we progress on in the story, Abraham and Sarah, they went to a place called Gerar, and there was a king named King Abimelech. Now, King Abimelech, he saw Sarah and knew that she was a beautiful woman, but before they got there, Abraham told her to do something, and this was not the first time he told her to do it. If you go back to chapter 12 and verse 14, what he's about to tell this king is the same thing he told her to tell the king Pharaoh back in chapter 12 verse 14, that is, don't tell them you're my wife because they'll kill me. So I want you to tell them that you're my brother. And so that's what they did. Now, technically, she was his brother. And you can go to earlier in the book of chapter 20 and verse 12, and you'll find how it is that the family lineage played out, that she was actually Abraham's brother. But that did not supersede the fact that he took her as his wife. And one of the things that was ironic in it is that Abraham said to his wife, he says, this is how you can show your love for me, by lying for me. Now, for you guys that are married, I don't know how that'd work in your house, but it wouldn't work real well in my house. You love your wife, you call your wife, regardless of whatever may come with the family or how the experiences occurred. The reality is you don't ask your wife to lie for you. But this is not the first time that Abraham had done this. And so, nonetheless, the king sees her and takes her. And he has not had a relationship with her, and God comes to him in a dream, and he tells him in a dream that he's in trouble, that he has taken another man's wife, and that there will be a curse that will come upon him and his family because of it. So the king wakes up and calls in Abraham and says, why did you do this thing? And of course Abraham says, well, because I was afraid you were going to kill me. Well, the king does the right thing, because the king does have an appreciation for a high set of moral values, if nothing else, realizes that this is not right, even though he was betrayed and tricked into it. And so he gives Abraham a sizable amount of wealth in order to make peace. And this is part of the way that Abraham adds to the wealth that he has, because remember, the Pharaoh gave him a sizable amount of wealth as well. Fast forward. Sarah, now, as things are settling down and she has her son Isaac, now becomes jealous over Hagar and Ishmael. Remember, Hagar was the Egyptian slave girl that Abraham slept with in order to have a child that was going to be Sarah's. And then the angel came to Sarah and said, hey, you're going to be with child. And so damage was done. Ishmael was born. But we find that Sarah could not get over her jealousy of the fact that Hagar was in the house, and so she tells Abraham to send Hagar and Ishmael away, and so to his dislike, because Abraham loved that boy. He had a relationship with that woman, and he had, a soft spot for them, because the boy was his flesh and blood. But nonetheless, Sarah was pretty domineering, overrode, so he takes Hagar and Ishmael and takes them out into the desert for all practical purposes to die. And when it gets to the point that she runs out of water, she runs out of food, she takes the boy and takes him about 100 yards away, because she couldn't stand to see him die. And the Bible's really interesting. It says the Lord heard the boy's cry, and God showed compassion, and an angel came down and provided to the needs of Hagar and Ishmael. There was a well there that Hagar couldn't see. In her moment of distress, she couldn't see. Now, I do think there's a spiritual lesson in that, and that is this: when we're in a state of distress, it's hard for us to see what God has in front of us, and it can be there the whole time, but we're so overwhelmed with our distress that we can't see it until we experience that reassurance from God that everything is going to be okay. And then it's like our eyes are opened up to see things that were blinded by the distress that Satan is overcoming us with. And that's the way it is today. If you're feeling overstressed, if you're feeling overwhelmed, maybe you just need to back up a little bit from it and do a little more listening to God and a little less listening to the world, and you'll see what God has to offer. Now, we close out by realizing that the king, Abimelech, came to Abraham and said this word. He said, God is with you in everything you do. And he made a treaty with him. And now what's going to happen is Abraham's going to live in the land of the Philistines. Now, the Philistines were first mentioned in chapter 10 and verse 13 under one of the sons of Noah. You'll find them listed in chapter 10 and verse 13. First time the nation of Philistines is referenced. But it says Abraham is going to live a long time there in peace. Now, here's the wrap up to the devotion this morning. Because what you've got is you got two daughters who slept with their daddy, both became pregnant, and they got two nations out of them. You got Abraham, who has a son by a servant girl, who now his wife Sarah, who now has a child, is jealous of and tells him to get rid of him. You got Abraham, who not once but twice has told his wife, hey, if you love me, you're going to lie for me to save my bacon, to save myself. That's what he was worried about, that he would be killed. These aren't exactly ideal family situations, but here's what I want you to think about. God uses all kinds of people. God uses all kinds of families. God uses all kinds of situations, none of which he created, but he has to come in on the backside and clean up after. God does not cause these situations, but he shows himself as a way through situations that are not ideal. I don't know what situation you're finding yourself in. For all I know, you could have made just as big a mess as Abraham did with his. But in spite of it all, God still loves us, and God will still use us, and he can use any situation that we create, and he can make a blessing out of it, if we give it to him, and if we'll follow his way.